All right, so get this. Today we're diving into how the Kremlin might be using media personalities, to sway Western
Oh,
opinion.
yeah. It's a pretty fascinating area. It goes beyond the typical spy stuff we see in movies, like the
Mhm.
briefcases of cash and, shady backroom deals.
Right.
It's a lot deeper than that.
And our source for this deep dive is a former FSB official.
Wow.
Yeah, who defected to the US.
Okay.
And they're saying figures like Tucker Carlson might be playing into Russia's hands, whether they realize it or not, as what they call useful idiots.
That term useful idiot's really important. It's about way more than just direct payments. It's more about, tapping into someone's ambition, their ego, maybe even their existing biases to further an agenda.
So is that kind of like how we all have a tendency to believe information that already fits our worldview, even if it's not completely accurate,
Yeah.
like confirmation bias?
Exactly. We all have those inherent biases. And the real danger is not even recognizing them. That's how we become vulnerable to manipulation.
Right. And our source points to some very specific examples of Carlson's commentary that seem to echo key messages coming from the Kremlin.
Right. His criticisms of Western policies, particularly regarding Ukraine and NATO, often mirror Russian propaganda almost word for word.
Wow.
For example, Carlson's claim that NATO expansion provoked the conflict in Ukraine directly mirrors the Kremlin's narrative,
Mm.
which, seeks to shift blame away from their own actions.
Yeah.
So,
And get this, there's this quote from Carlson. He's blaming Biden for pushing the world closer to nuclear war. And guess where he said this?
I don't know.
He was broadcasting from Moscow at the time.
Wow, that's a really interesting detail. Right.
Right.
Makes you wonder if Carlson is being intentionally provocative or if it's a genuine belief that just happens to, align with the Kremlin's stance.
Hmm.
So if Russia isn't necessarily bribing everyone, what is the motivation for these individuals to align themselves with the Kremlin's narrative?
Well, our source says that even a small fee can be enough for some.
Yeah.
Especially for those who already have, gripes with the West or crave attention.
Yeah, it might not always be about the money itself. It's about what it represents, influence, power, being in the inner circle.
And the fact that Carlson was in Moscow, possibly unable to receive wire transfers, adds another layer to this.
Oh, absolutely. It suggests that Russia might not be directly buying loyalty with, suitcases of cash, but they're playing a long game,
Right.
exploiting those existing divisions, amplifying the voices that create discord within Western nations. Think about it. They don't need to create these elaborate lies. They just need to muddy the waters enough to make people lose trust in legitimate sources of information.
It's almost like they're weaponizing confusion.
Exactly.
Yeah, so in a way, figures like Carlson, if they are echoing those Kremlin narratives, are almost like a weapon in this information war.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. They become tools,
Huh.
to further that agenda of sowing that chaos and distrust. And it's especially effective in today's world.
Because of the constant, barrage of information we're all dealing with.
Exactly. Think about it. We're bombarded with, news and opinions and facts, from all sides constantly. It's overwhelming.
Right.
And that's precisely what makes this tactic so dangerous.
Because it's harder to sift through it all and figure out what's real and what's not.
Precisely. These figures exploit the deluge of data, amplifying that doubt, making us question everything. They prey on our existing biases, confirming our suspicions and making us more likely to accept information that aligns with our pre-existing beliefs, even if it, lacks evidence.
Yeah.
It's like a self-perpetuating cycle of misinformation.
So they're not necessarily outright lying. They're just muddying the waters enough to create confusion and distrust.
Exactly. And that's where the real danger lies. It's not just about spreading falsehoods. It's about eroding our trust in institutions, in experts, even in each other.
Right.
It's a way to undermine the very fabric of our societies.
So what does all this mean for us, the listeners? How do we navigate this minefield of information and make sure we're not being manipulated?
It all boils down to critical thinking. We need to become more discerning consumers of information, constantly questioning what we see, read, and hear.
So we can't just take things at face value.
Exactly. We need to ask ourselves, who's presenting this information? What are their motivations? What's their agenda? Are they appealing to our emotions or presenting, Evidence-based arguments. Are they offering diverse perspectives, or are they just reinforcing our existing biases?
So it's about constantly questioning and digging deeper, not just blindly accepting what we're told.
Precisely. It's about cultivating that healthy skepticism and being aware of our own vulnerability.
Okay.
We all have biases, we all have blind spots, and those are exactly what these tactics exploit.
But isn't it possible that some individuals genuinely believe in the viewpoints they're espousing, even if, they happen to align with Russian interests?
That's a great question, and it's important to consider that possibility. It's not always about, malicious intent. Sometimes it's about naivete, about being caught up on a narrative, about genuinely believing that you're on the right side of history.
But even if their intentions are good, the impact can still be harmful.
Absolutely. Whether they're, witting or unwitting participants, the effect is the same. They're contributing to the spread of misinformation and undermining trust in legitimate sources.
Right.
They become, in a sense, amplifiers for a dangerous narrative.
So how do we differentiate between, genuine belief and intentional manipulation?
That's where things get tricky. It's not always easy to discern motive, especially in a world where everyone has a platform and everyone is vying for our attention. But there are some things we can look for.
Like what? Give us some practical tips here.
One red flag is consistency. If someone consistently echoes the talking points of a particular government or ideology, especially if it, benefits them in some way, that's a sign to be cautious.
So if they're always singing the praises of a certain country or leader, regardless of the facts, that should raise some eyebrows.
Exactly. Another thing to watch for is the use of emotionally charged language and imagery.
Okay.
Propaganda often relies on, fear, anger, and resentment to stir up emotions and make people more receptive to its message.
So if they're constantly trying to scare us or make us angry, that's a sign that they might be trying to manipulate us.
Precisely. They might be trying to bypass our rational thinking and appeal directly to our emotional responses.
And what about the use of facts? Should we be wary of people who present themselves as experts or cite studies and statistics?
Not necessarily. It's not about dismissing facts altogether. It's about scrutinizing them.
Okay.
Where are these facts coming from? Are the sources credible? Are they being presented in a balanced and objective way?
So it's about checking the sources and making sure they're not cherry-picking data to support their agenda.
Exactly. It's about looking for the full picture, not just the convenient snippets that fit a particular narrative.
This is a lot to take in. It sounds like we need to be almost like detectives, constantly investigating and cross-referencing information.
In a way, yes. We need to become more, critical and discerning consumers of information.
Okay, but that can be exhausting, right? Who has time to fact-check everything they read or hear?
That's a valid point. It's not about being constantly suspicious or paranoid. It's about developing a healthy skepticism and being aware of the potential for manipulation.
So it's more about like being aware of those red flags and knowing when to dig a little deeper.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about living in a constant state of fear or distrust. It's about being, informed, engaged, empowered.
It sounds like a lot of responsibility is falling on us, the audience, to sort through all this noise.
Well, in a way, yes, but it's also an opportunity.
Okay.
We have more access to information than ever before,
Right.
which means we have the power to be more informed and more discerning than previous generations.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by the constant influx of information. But we also have more tools at our disposal to fact check and verify and get different perspectives.
Precisely. We can use technology to our advantage. There are websites, apps, even browser extensions that can help us identify, fake news, track the spread of misinformation, connect with those credible sources.
So while it's important to be aware of the potential for manipulation, we shouldn't let that, paralyze us or make us cynical about all information.
Absolutely not. It's about finding that balance between healthy skepticism and open-mindedness, being critical thinkers, not cynics.
So what's the takeaway here? What's the one thing you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to remember that you're not powerless. You have the ability to think for yourself, to question what you're told, and to seek out the truth.
It's about recognizing that we're all targets in this information war, but we're also the front line of defense.
Exactly. By becoming more aware of these tactics, by
Yeah.
by developing our critical thinking skills, and by supporting credible sources of information, we can all play a role in combating misinformation and protecting our democracies.
So in this world of information overload and potential manipulation, how do we ensure we're not being misled?
It starts with awareness. Recognize that the information landscape is complex and that there are actors who will try to exploit our biases and vulnerabilities. Don't be afraid to, question, to dig deeper, to seek out diverse perspectives. And remember, it's okay to change your mind when presented with new evidence.
That's such an important point. Yeah, being a critical thinker isn't about being stubborn or clinging to our beliefs. It's about being open to new information and being willing to adjust our understanding when the facts warrant it.
Absolutely. And finally, remember that this is an ongoing process. There's no finish line when it comes to critical thinking. It's a skill we need to constantly, hone and develop, especially in a world where the information landscape is constantly evolving.
So it's not about like achieving perfect knowledge or becoming immune to manipulation. It's about being, engaged and informed and always learning.
Precisely. And by embracing that journey of lifelong learning, we empower ourselves to navigate the complexities of the information age and make informed decisions that benefit, ourselves and our communities.
That's a great note to end on. Food for thought for all of us. Thanks for diving deep with us today.